شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Amma ba'd, brothers and sisters in Islam, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For the past 7 to 8 lectures, I've been sticking to the topic of globalization, its effect on society from an Islamic perspective. Tonight, for the sake of setting the balance, I'd like to expound on globalization, but from the Western perspective. As I had said in previous elections, previous lectures, previous meetings and conferences, different places, both in Tanzania and in Kenya, the Western civilization has two sides. One is good, one is bad. But it takes an educated person, an informed person, to be able to judge between what is good and what is bad, in order to stay on course when dealing with Western scholars, Western developers, Western corporations, multinational, Western NGOs and CSOs, etc. After talking to you last night about the international law of colonialism in East Africa, precisely touching on German and England and the doctrine of discovery, I quoted at length a paper written by Robert J. Miller and Olivia Stitz. And the view that these two writers were giving was an analytical but critical analysis of what the international law of colonialism did to the East African indigenous population. I used that paper's writings to sort of keep a balance on what we've been talking about for the last week, so that I stay out of the picture of being seen like one who doesn't want globalization. They, in their writing, give the background to what happened through the European way of life system and approach towards globalization, what they did to our forefathers. Now, tonight, as I promised, what is globalization? What is it? What is the definition of globalization? Benefits and negative effects of globalization. What are the top examples of globalization and what famous quotes have been said about globalization? This is my subject tonight. A simple definition of globalization would be something like this. Globalization means the speed up of movements and exchanges of human beings, goods and services, capital, technologies, or cultural practices all over the planet. One of the effects of globalization is that it promotes and increases interactions between different regions and populations around the globe. That's a simple definition of globalization. An official definition of globalization by the World Health Organization goes like this. According to World Health Organization, globalization can be defined as the increased interconnectedness and interdependence of peoples and countries. It is generally understood to include two interrelated elements: the opening of international borders to increasingly fast flows of goods, services, finance, people, and ideas, and the changes in institutions and policies at national and international levels that facilitate or promote such flows. What is globalization in the economy? According to the Committee for Development Policy, a subsidiary body of the United Nations. From an economic point of view, globalization can be defined as the increasing interdependence of world economies as a result of the growing scale of cross-border trade of commodities and services, the flow of international capital, and the wide and rapid spread of technologies. It reflects the continuing expansion and mutual integration of market frontiers and the rapid growing significance of information in all types of productive activities, and marketization are the two major driving forces for economic globalization. What is globalization in geography? In geography, globalization is defined as, quote unquote, the set of processes, economic, social, cultural, technological, institutional, that contribute to the relationship between societies and individuals around the world. It is a progressive process by which exchanges and flows between different parts of the world are intensified. On a broader scale now, globalization and G20. What is the G20? The G20 is a global bloc composed by the governments and central bank governors from 19 countries and the European Union. Established in 1999, the G20 gathers the most important industrialized and developing economies to discuss international economic and financial stability. Together, the nations of the G20 account for around 80% of global economic output, nearly 75% of all global trade, and about 2/3 of the world's population. That's the G20. G20 leaders get together in an annual summit to discuss and coordinate pressing global issues of mutual interest. And though economics and trade are usually the centerpieces of each summit's agenda, issues like climate change, migration, policies and terrorism, the future of work, or global wealth are recurring focuses too. Since the G20 leaders represent the political backbone of the global financial architecture that secures open markets, orderly capital flows, and a safety net for countries in difficulty, it is often thanks to bilateral meetings during summits that major international agreements are achieved and that globalization is able to move forward. What this implies is that G20 plays a major role in moving the globalization issue. The joint action of G20 leaders has unquestionably been useful to save the global financial system in the 2008-2009 crisis. Thanks to trade barriers removed and the implementation of huge financial reforms. Nonetheless, the G20 has been struggling to be successful at coordinating monetary and fiscal policies and unable to root out tax evasion and corruption, among other downsides of globalization. As a result of this and other failures from the G20 in coordinating globalization, popular nationalist movements across the world have been defending countries should pursue their interests alone or form fruitful coalitions. Now, this is where the barrier comes in of globalization, because of the failure of G20 countries. How do we make globalization more just? The ability of countries to rise above narrow self-interest has brought unprecedented economic wealth and plenty of applicable scientific progress. No doubt. However, for different reasons, not everyone has been benefiting the same from globalization and technological change. And this has been happening ever since. That's why when we want to apply this science of globalization to discussing these issues globally, then there'll be different views from different regions and different people. We won't think alike. Wealth is unfairly distributed, and economic growth came at huge environmental costs. How can countries rise above narrow self-interest and act together, or designing fairer societies and a healthier planet? How do we make globalization more just? How? When they are the haves and the have-nots. According to Christine Lagarde, former president of the International Monetary Fund, she says, and I quote, "Decades about trade, debates about trade, and access to foreign goods are as old as society itself." We come back to my point that globalization didn't start in the 1990s. It's been there ages. That's why the doctrine of discovery was about plunging us into poverty. That's why they invaded us and killed our forefathers, destroyed our towns and our way of life. It was pre-planned, and they knew what they were coming to do, and they knew why they had to tell it falsely in schools. How to make globalization more just is a very complex question that involves redesigning economic system. But how? That's the question. Globalization is deeply connected with economic systems and markets, which on their turn impact and are impacted by social issues, cultural factors that are hard to overcome, regional specificities, timings of action, and collaborative networks. This is what globalization is all about on one side of the whole issue. All of this requires, on one hand, global consensus and cooperation, and on the other, country-specific solutions, apart from a good definition of the adjective just, quote unquote, just. So, to be on the safe side, we have to go back to the historical aspect of globalization, the history of globalization. When did globalization begin? For some people, this global phenomenon is inherent to human nature. Because of this, some say globalization began about 60,000 years ago, at the beginning of human history, so they say. Throughout time, human societies exchanging trade has been growing. Since the old times, different civilizations have developed commercial trade routes and experienced cultural exchanges. And as well, the migratory phenomenon has also been contributing to these population exchanges, especially nowadays, since traveling became quicker, more comfortable, and more affordable. This phenomenon has continued throughout history, notably through military conquests and exploration expeditions, like what we've been through. Military conquest by the Portuguese, and then exploration and expeditions by the British, the Germans, etc. But it wasn't until technological advances in transportation and communication that globalization speeded up. Locomotives and all this, coal mining, big farms and all this, investments by Imperial British East Africa, German East Africa. It was particularly after the second half of the 20th century that world trades accelerated in such a dimension and speed that the term globalization started to be commonly used. Because of trade developments and financial exchanges, we often think of globalization as an economic and financial phenomenon. Nonetheless, it includes a much wider field than just flowing of goods, services, or capital. Often referred to as the globalization concept map, some examples of globalization are, now let me mention some. Economic globalization, This is the development of trade system within transnational actors such as corporations or NGOs. Financial globalization can be linked with the rise of a global financial system with international financial exchanges and monetary exchanges. Stock markets, for instance, are a great example of the financially connected global world, since when one stock market has a decline, it affects other markets negatively as well as the economy as a whole. Cultural globalization, which has affected us tremendously. Cultural globalization refers to the interpretation of cultures, which, as a consequence, means nations adopt principles, beliefs, and costumes of other nations, losing their unique culture to a unique globalized supra-culture. I repeat this one because of its significance and relevance. Cultural globalization refers to the interpenetration of cultures, which, as a consequence, means nations adopt principles, beliefs, and costumes of other nations, losing their unique culture to a unique globalized supraculture. Political globalization. The development and growing influence of international organizations such as the UN, United Nations, or WHO, World Health Organization, means governmental actions take place at an international level. There are other bodies operating at a global level, such as NGOs like Doctors Without Borders or Oxfam, etc. USAID. Sociological globalization. Information moves almost in real time, together with the interconnection and interdependence of events and their consequences. People move all the time too, mixing and integrating different societies. Then there's the technological globalization. The phenomenon by which millions of people are interconnected thanks to the power of the digital world via platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Skype, YouTube, WhatsApp, Telegram, you name it. Now, the cultural globalization and the technological globalization are the moving instruments of society. And because the war is being fought against hearts and minds, most of us fall victim to these systems and advancements of culture and technology. Why do we fall victims? We go back to square one, because we don't have institutions that belong to us that research on these issues and inform the masses the do's and don'ts. And it has done this across the board. The youth and the older generation have both fell victim. Geographic globalization is the new organization and hierarchy of different regions of the world that is constantly changing. AU, East African Community, SADC, ECOWAS, ASEAN, European Union. Moreover, with transportation and flying made so easy and affordable, apart from a few countries with demanding visas, it is possible to travel the world without barely any restrictions. Imagine those who move from London to Germany, Hamburg, move to Amsterdam. They're bringing this to us now. We've started one border, one-stop border post. Then we'd move closer, just one office that takes care of everything. Ecological globalization accounts for the idea of considering planet Earth as a single global entity. Remember Agenda 21, United Nations? A common good all societies should protect, since the weather affects everyone, and we all are protected by the same atmosphere. But they don't tell, that's why I'm telling you always that when we talk about globalization, here is where we go in. The environment. How much care do we have for the environment? These are the questions they ask us. But what they don't tell us is the other side of how much danger they are to the environment. We want a greener world and all this. Yeah, but they don't talk to us about geoengineering. They don't talk to us about chemtrails. They don't talk to us about weather warfare and controlling the weather by the year 2030, 2025, 2050. And these are reports that are open for anyone to read, download and read. So when they talk about ecological globalization, a common good all societies should protect, since the weather affects everyone and we are all protected by the same atmosphere. To this regard, it is often said that poorest countries that have been polluting the least will suffer the most from climate change. How many of us here know how many satellites are up there? How many satellites? And how big is a satellite? Let alone who will tell us what danger do these satellites do to the Earth and the humans and the animals and nature in general. What about, just an example, what about if all these changes, weather changes on Earth, derive from the satellites that are up there? Who in our society can say, yes, this is the cause? This is what causes this much heat. This is what causes tornadoes. Who will tell us about these things? Who has the knowledge to confirm to us, yes, this is what causes tornadoes. This is what causes earthquakes. This is what causes volcanoes. This is what causes tsunamis. They call it, quote unquote, conspiracy theory. No, go read. I told you, look for something called HAARP. H-A-A-R-P. But between every letter there is a full stop. H full stop, A full stop, A full stop, R full stop, P full stop. Then project, HAARP project. Now listen. Or if you want heavy material, write critical analysis of HAARP project. Now let's go to the benefits of globalization. Globalization has benefits that cover many different areas. it reciprocally developed economies all over the world and increased cultural exchanges. It also allows financial exchanges between companies, changing the paradigm of work. Many people are nowadays citizens of the world. The origin of goods, because they become secondary and geographic distance is no longer a barrier for many services to happen. These are the good sides of globalization. The engine of globalization, economy, for example. The most visible impacts of globalization are definitely the one affecting the economic world. Globalization has led to a sharp increase in trade and economic exchanges, but also to a multiplication of financial exchanges. It's so easy, M-Pesa, Tigo Pesa, send someone cash without moving. Send it through the phone. That's the good side of globalization. In the 1970s, world economies opened up and the development of free trade policies accelerated the globalization phenomenon. Between 1950 and 2010, world exports increased 33-fold. This significantly contributed to increasing the interactions between different regions of the world. This acceleration of economic exchanges has led to strong global economic growth. It fostered as well as a rapid global industrial development that allowed the rapid development of many of the technologies and commodities we have available nowadays. I've mentioned several times about economic zones. There's special economic zones, export processing zone. All these build the economy of any nation they are in, though they have their own misgivings. Cheap labor, this is what they look for. It's cheaper to open an industry here than doing it in Europe or the Americas. There's cheap labor up here. Knowledge became easily shared and international cooperation among the brightest minds speeded things up. This is the benefit of globalization. According to some analysts, globalization has also contributed to improving global economic conditions, creating much economic wealth, though that was, as they say, unequally distributed. Global benefit, there's also financial examples. At the same time, finance also became globalized. From the 1980s, driven by neoliberal policies, the world of finance gradually opened. Many states, particularly the United States under Ronald Reagan and the UK under Margaret Thatcher, introduced the famous 3D policy: disintermediation, decommissioning, and deregulation. These are the 3 Ds. The idea was to simplify finance regulations, eliminate mediators, and break down the barriers between the world's financial centers. And the goal was to make it easier to exchange capital between the world's financial players. This financial globalization was contributed to the rise, or has contributed to the rise of a global financial market in which contracts and capital exchanges have multiplied, which is true. But having said that, we still go back to the same question. Where do we stand in these issues? Where are we? Or is this just knowledge we are passing to one another? Are we among those involved into these things? How are we involved? Macro or micro? What is our value? What role do we play in this? Now, I picked on this subject tonight because after 7 days lectures, I needed to come to this and show the audience that I know the good side of this thing, but from an Islamic perspective, we have to know the bad side too, in order for us to set the balance and keep the mode straight. When we talk about the good side of globalization, we see who is benefiting from this good side of globalization. Now, this is where the question comes is, are we part and parcel of those who benefit from the good side of globalization, or are we still outside the field? What strategies do we have? What plans do we have for the future generation? What plans do we have for the now generation? What are the consequences if we are not in it? Has it already started here in Tanzania or still at its first stage? Well, maybe you're living here, you can't see it. I see it better. I see like Tanzania being a role model for the East African region. In terms of culture, music and all this, we've talked about this. In terms of infrastructure, it's already started, Mwendokasi. You have like, I have to mention this out, the Bohora community. Look at how they're living. Look at their own ground and schools and playground. This is the future smart city infrastructure. You'll have to find a place where you'd all go in. You remember I mentioned you Hunger Games episodes on TV, series. You'd have to live like that. You'll have to live at a time where, if not drones, then CCTVs are all over your estate. They know who's coming in, who's going out. These are smart cities. Check for your parking before you come into town through phone, smartphone. Can you use smartphone? If you can't, then you are not for this town. Stay in the suburban areas. Stay in villages, don't come to town. They can pinpoint you like you don't belong here because you're not digital. This is the life that's coming with globalization. That's why I say we need to discuss these issues. We need to inform one another about what does globalization really entail. When someone talks to you, are you globalized? Do you know what it means? That is culturally, financially, economically, traditionally. Are you globalized? Are we on the table awaiting someone to serve us? Or are we the items that are going to be served to those who are on the table? Do you understand? Are we on the table waiting to be served? Or are we among the things that are going to be served to those who are on the table waiting to be served? We need to wake up. We need to be a society that is informed. We need to know and be aware of what time it is. We need to globalize our minds, but positively, not negatively. Not for anyone else to plan us. We need to look at the Quran and the Prophet's way of life and Sunnah to see where we stand. We need to do Islam, not only talk Islam. We need to come from the stage where mosques or masjids give hope instead of solutions. Do we understand the difference? Our institutions, our religious institutions, be they be churches, synagogues, be they temples for the Hindus or masjids for Muslims, give hope only, dua. They don't offer solutions for our problems. And they are supposed to be institutes that offer solutions. There's nothing bad with offering hopes, but hopes only doesn't solve the issue. Give us hope, but in the meantime, you're looking for solutions. Why is it that we are always being given hope only? The Quran says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, له معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه يحفظون من أمر الله. A group of angels, front of you and behind you, who write down everything by command from Allah. Then it goes, إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. Nafs, not mind, not heart. Unless we change what is in our nafs. Now, what is nafs? These are the things that I tell you. If you know how to focus, if you are conscious, then you'd go, okay, excuse me. So it's not the heart that has to change. It's not the mind that has to change. It's nafs. What is nafs? It is what is Nafs entails everything, the mind, the heart, the soul, everything has to change. The ears, the eyes, and this is nafs. Why? Because these groups, these two groups, and when it's groups, how many are they? You know, Munkar wa Nakir, yeah, but Allah says groups. Go to chapter 13, verse 11. A group of angels in front and behind you. How? What makes a group? 1, 2. How come no one tells us about these angels? Anyone has told you that you have a group of angels in front of you and behind you, daily following you up, like whatever you do, you smile, you talk, you think, they just write down the full data Allah has. That's why from these records, from these angels, two groups in front and behind you, this is where Allah comes in, the same ayah. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. But he goes on to say, وَإِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِقَوْمٍ سُوءًا فَلَا مَرَدَّ لَهُ وَمَا لَهُم مِّن دُونِهِ مِنْ وَالٍ. If these records come in and you don't change, and it comes to a time I decide like, okay, let me show you who I am as Allah, the Creator. You have no guard against me. Neither will you get any help from anyone until myself, I just say, okay, now is. How safe are we? So for Allah to see that we changed, we have to change nafs, not the mind, not the ears, all together, plus the soul. It has to take control. Because normally the soul, whenever you want to do anything wrong, it tells you, before you do, please don't do this. It's not right. You argue against it. It doesn't force you. But as soon as you finish doing the mistake, it comes back and tells you, you see now, what did you do? What about if Allah now wants to punish you? Then automatically you start, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. And you think, no, that's enough. Because all sheikhs have told you, Inna Allah Ghafurur Rahim. It didn't tell you about the other verse that says, no. He only says, okay, Ghafur because you did this because of ignorance. You didn't know. Now you know, you repeat. Now, as Muslims, we need to be conscious of Allah. That's why I don't like using the word fear. I like the word conscious of Allah. That is always with you, closer than the jugular vein. Now, if you are aware, if you are conscious that Allah is closer than the jugular vein, do you have any secret that you do? Even when you are in dark places, do you think you are doing anything secretively? This is the approach I'd like us to look at. We've talked about globalization on the negative side. We talk about globalization, the Western aspect, but the positive side, as they say. Now, the Islamic perspective is to balance between the two and see what good will this do to us as a society, not only as an individual, and what bad can it cause, what harm can it cause to us. If harm outweighs benefit, then we discuss this issue and think, should we go with it or just let it go? If good outweighs bad, then of course we discuss again and see what is the shura. Should we go with this or let it go? And this is the Islamic way of looking at things. Not only because Stambuli said, so we have to agree or disagree. No, Stambuli said, but let's use our minds, our hearts. Let's look at this thing deeper and see what we can do as a society. But we can't just totally ignore it, and we can just totally go with it just because someone says it's good. That's the better part of people staying together and informing one another and taking decisions. I think for tonight that will do. And inshallah, wherever I said something maybe it annoys you, please forgive me. If I said anything that you agree with, please pray for me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.